There is a particular kind of pain that confuses us more than it wounds us, the pain of still loving someone who hurt us. We tell ourselves we should be angry. We tell ourselves we should move on. Our friends remind us of what was done, how we were treated, how we deserved better. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the world softens and the noise fades, we find that we are still holding on. Not because we are weak, not because we enjoy suffering, but because somewhere deep inside, the attachment feels stronger than the injury. What we struggle with is not simply heartbreak. It is attachment. It is the nervous system clinging to what once felt safe, even if that safety was inconsistent. It is the child within us who learned early that love and pain can occupy the same space. When someone hurts us and we still cannot let them go, it is not a failure of logic. It is a reflection of our earliest relational imprints. The question is not, why am I so foolish? The real question is, what part of me is still trying to survive through this connection? Tonight, we are not here to judge ourselves. We are here to understand. Because when we understand the roots of our attachment, we loosen the grip of shame. And in the absence of shame, healing begins. Attachment is not a choice, it is a biological imperative. Before we ever learned to speak, before we developed reasoning, before we could evaluate whether someone was good for us, our nervous system was already wired to attach. For an infant, attachment is survival. Without connection, the body interprets danger. Without closeness, the system activates panic. When someone hurts you and you still cannot let them go, what you are experiencing is not stupidity. It is attachment overriding logic. The thinking brain may list the reasons to leave. The heart may replay the betrayals. But the deeper brain, the survival brain, whispers something far more primitive. Don't lose the bond. The body does not prioritize happiness. It prioritizes familiarity and survival. If love in your early years was inconsistent, unpredictable, or intertwined with pain, your nervous system learned that closeness and hurt can coexist. So when someone wounds you in adulthood, it does not necessarily signal danger to your system. It signals familiarity. And familiarity feels safe, even when it is destructive. This is why people stay in relationships that diminish them. This is why they defend someone who has broken their trust. This is why letting go feels like falling into a void. Because for the nervous system, the rupture of attachment feels more threatening than the continuation of pain. We often shame ourselves for this. We say, I know better. But knowing better is a function of the cortex, the rational mind. Attachment lives in the limbic system in the body, in circuits formed long before conscious thought. You cannot reason your way out of something that was wired into you before language. There is also the phenomenon of hope. When attachment forms under inconsistent conditions, the bond strengthens. Intermittent reward, moments of affection followed by withdrawal, creates a powerful imprint. The brain releases dopamine not simply in response to love, but in response to unpredictability. The uncertainty intensifies the craving. So you are not just attached to the person, you are attached to the possibility of who they could be. Logic says, look at their actions. Attachment says, but remember their potential. And potential can be intoxicating. When someone hurts you, the logical response would be to withdraw. But if that person has also been your source of comfort, your body associates them with relief. They are both the wound and the bandage. The system becomes confused. You seek from them the very safety that their behavior compromised. This creates a loop. Pain increases the need for soothing. The person who caused the pain becomes the target of the soothing, and the bond tightens. To understand this is not to excuse harmful behavior. It is to remove shame from your struggle, because shame only deepens attachment. When you believe you are weak for staying, you feel smaller. And when you feel smaller, you crave connection even more. What you are truly experiencing is the fear of disconnection. For the nervous system, disconnection can feel like annihilation. In childhood, losing attachment could mean losing protection. That imprint does not disappear just because we grow older. It lives in the body. So when you try to let go and feel panic rising, that panic is ancient. It is not about this one relationship alone. It echoes earlier experiences where love felt uncertain, where connection felt fragile, where approval had to be earned. Attachment is stronger than logic because it is older than logic. Healing begins not by forcing yourself to detach, but by creating new experiences of safety. When your body learns that you can survive without this bond, when it feels connection elsewhere, in friendships, in self-compassion, in stable relationships, the grip loosens naturally, not through force but through regulation. You cannot shame yourself into freedom. You cannot think yourself out of a wound that was formed in relationship. You can only heal it in relationship, including the relationship you build with yourself. The question is not why you are still holding on. The question is what your nervous system is afraid will happen if you finally let go. Trauma bonds feel like love, but they are not born from safety. They are born from intensity, and intensity can be deeply misleading. When someone oscillates between warmth and withdrawal, affection and cruelty, presence and absence, the emotional spikes do something powerful to the brain. They create a chemical attachment that mimics passion, devotion, even destiny. A trauma bond forms when pain and relief come from the same source. The person who wounds you is also the one who comforts you. The one who destabilizes you is the one who calms you, at least temporarily. This pairing creates confusion in the nervous system. The body begins to associate emotional survival with staying connected to the very person who disrupts it. The dynamic often begins subtly. There may be an initial period of closeness that feels extraordinary. You feel seen, understood, chosen. For someone whose early attachment experiences were inconsistent, this intensity can feel like home, not necessarily a peaceful home, but a familiar one. The nervous system recognizes the rhythm, closeness mixed with unpredictability, and interprets it as meaningful. Then comes the rupture, withdrawal, criticism, silence, betrayal. Your body reacts with anxiety. Cortisol rises, the attachment alarm activates. You feel the urge to fix, to explain, to prove your worth, to restore harmony. The distress is not mild, it feels urgent, almost life-threatening at times. Because on a subconscious level, it echoes early relational experiences where disconnection felt catastrophic. When the person returns with affection, apology, or even a small gesture of warmth, the relief is profound. Dopamine surges, oxytocin flows. The body relaxes, and that relief becomes reinforcing. It strengthens the bond far more powerfully than steady kindness ever could. The contrast between pain and comfort intensifies the attachment. This is why trauma bonds are so difficult to break. They are not sustained by happiness, they are sustained by cycles. The unpredictability keeps the nervous system hyper, focused. You become vigilant, you monitor tone, mood, messages, timing. You scan for signs of withdrawal. You feel responsible for maintaining equilibrium. In this state, your world narrows around the relationship. Over time, the highs feel intoxicating because they temporarily quiet the anxiety created by the lows. The reconciliation feels euphoric not because it is healthy, but because it ends the distress. The body mistakes the cessation of pain for love. Relief becomes proof of connection. There is also often a deeper layer, the longing to repair something old. Many trauma bonds are unconsciously shaped by early childhood dynamics. If love once required you to earn approval, to tolerate unpredictability, or to endure emotional absence, then this pattern feels emotionally coherent. The adult relationship becomes a stage where the child part of you tries again, this time hoping for a different outcome. You may find yourself saying, "But when it's good, it's really good." That statement is the hallmark of trauma bonding. The goodness feels amplified because it follows suffering. The contrast heightens the experience. But true love does not rely on contrast. It does not require fear to make closeness feel meaningful. Another feature of trauma bonding is self-blame. When the relationship falters, you may immediately turn inward. You question your tone, your needs, your reactions. You minimize what happened. You rationalize their behavior. This self-abandonment strengthens the bond because it preserves the attachment at the cost of your own clarity. Preserving connection feels safer than confronting reality. Breaking a trauma bond often feels like withdrawal. There can be cravings, intrusive thoughts, a longing for contact that feels physical. This is not weakness. It reflects the neurochemical imprint of the cycle. The brain has linked this person with both threat and relief, creating a powerful loop. Understanding that trauma bonds feel like love is the first step toward freedom. Because once you see the pattern, you can begin to separate intensity from intimacy. You can recognize that anxiety is not proof of depth. You can start to question whether what you are calling love is actually a nervous system seeking regulation through the familiar. True connection does not require you to endure harm in order to receive tenderness. It does not keep you in a constant state of hypervigilance. It does not confuse your body. When safety is present, the nervous system softens instead of tightening. Love feels steady rather than dramatic. If you cannot let go, it may not be because you are deeply loved. It may be because you are deeply bonded through unresolved pain. And pain, when intertwined with attachment, can masquerade as devotion in ways that are profoundly convincing. Your nervous system does not evaluate relationships the way your mind does. It does not sit down and analyze patterns, weigh pros and cons, or calculate long-term consequences. It asks only one essential question: is this familiar? And if the answer is yes, it often equates that familiarity with safety. This is one of the most painful paradoxes of human attachment. What feels safe is not always what is healthy. What feels right is not always what is good for us. The nervous system is shaped early in life, long before we have conscious choice. It learns what love looks like by absorbing the emotional climate around us. If love was calm and consistent, the body relaxes around calm and consistent people. But if love was unpredictable, conditional, emotionally distant, or intertwined with anxiety, then unpredictability becomes encoded as normal. Later in life, when someone hurts you but also feels familiar, your body does not automatically interpret that as danger. Instead, it recognizes the emotional rhythm, the tension, the longing, the effort to reconnect. These sensations feel known. And what is known feels survivable. This is why you may find yourself drawn to people who replicate early emotional patterns. Not because you consciously want pain, but because your nervous system is seeking coherence. It is trying to recreate what it understands, even if what it understands was imperfect or harmful. Familiar pain can feel strangely comforting. There is a script you know how to follow. You know how to chase, how to appease, how to stay silent, how to over-explain, how to anticipate moods. These strategies may have once protected you. As a child, adapting to instability may have preserved attachment. You learn to read subtle cues. You learn to minimize your needs. You learn to equate love with effort. So when a partner withdraws or behaves in ways that unsettle you, your nervous system activates those old strategies automatically. You may feel anxiety rising, but alongside it comes a sense of purpose. If I try harder, I can fix this. The distress becomes paired with determination, and that determination feels meaningful, even noble. Healthy love, in contrast, can initially feel unfamiliar, even boring. If your system is accustomed to intensity, steadiness may feel flat. If you are used to chasing reassurance, consistent reassurance may feel almost suspicious. The absence of drama can feel like the absence of passion. This does not mean you prefer chaos. It means your body equates emotional spikes with connection. The adrenaline, the uncertainty, the relief after conflict, these create a biochemical experience that feels alive. Calm does not stimulate the same urgency, and without urgency, you may misinterpret stability as lack of depth. The nervous system is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to protect you using outdated maps. It learned those maps in environments where connection required vigilance. It does not automatically update itself, simply because you now understand your patterns intellectually. When someone hurts you but remains familiar, your body may prioritize preserving the bond over preserving your peace. Letting go can feel like stepping into the unknown. And the unknown, for a nervous system shaped by inconsistency, can feel more threatening than staying in something painful but predictable. This is why healing is not just a cognitive decision. You cannot simply tell yourself to choose better and expect your body to comply. The work involves gently teaching your nervous system that safety can exist without anxiety, that connection can exist without hypervigilance, that love does not have to be earned through endurance. As you begin to experience relationships, including friendships and your relationship with yourself, that are consistent and attuned, the nervous system slowly recalibrates. It learns that calm is not emptiness, that respect is not distance, that reliability is not dullness. But until that recalibration happens, you may continue to feel pulled toward what feels familiar, even if it hurts. And when you judge yourself for that pull, you activate even more stress, reinforcing the very patterns you wish to escape. Understanding that your nervous system mistakes familiar pain for safety invites compassion. It shifts the narrative from, "What is wrong with me?" to, "What did my body learn?" And when you approach your patterns with curiosity instead of criticism, you begin to create the internal safety that was once missing. In that safety, the old familiarity loses its grip, not because you force yourself to detach, but because your body no longer needs the chaos to feel connected. Very often, when you cannot let go of the one who hurt you, it is not only the adult part of you that is holding on. It is the inner child, the younger self who once needed love in ways that may not have been fully met. That child part does not understand timelines. It does not recognize that you are now grown. It only recognizes familiar emotional landscapes and unfinished longings. The inner child is not a metaphor in a poetic sense. It is a psychological and neurological reality. The experiences you had in your earliest relationships shaped the pathways of your brain. They shaped your expectations of love, your sense of worth, your tolerance for inconsistency. When something was missing, emotional attunement, protection, reassurance, the need did not disappear. It went underground. As children, we cannot afford to give up on attachment figures. Even if they are unpredictable, distant, critical, or overwhelmed, our survival depends on maintaining the bond. So instead of concluding, they cannot give me what I need, we often conclude, something must be wrong with me. That belief becomes embedded quietly, shaping how we approach relationships later in life. When a partner hurts you and you still long for them, it may be because they have activated that early longing. They represent, unconsciously, the possibility of finally receiving what was once missing. The adult mind may see the red flags, but the child part sees hope. Hope that this time, if you love harder, explain better, endure more patiently, you will finally be chosen in the way you always needed. This is not weakness. It is a deeply human attempt at repair. Often, the intensity of your reaction to being hurt in adulthood is disproportionate to the present moment. A delayed text, emotional withdrawal, criticism, these can trigger profound anxiety or despair. That intensity frequently signals that something older has been touched. The current partner is not only a partner, they are a doorway to earlier emotional wounds. The inner child does not seek perfection. It seeks repair. It seeks the experience of rupture followed by consistent, reliable reassurance. If you did not receive enough repair in childhood, if conflicts were ignored, emotions dismissed, or love withdrawn as punishment, then you may be especially sensitive to relational breaks now. And when someone hurts you, your longing to fix the bond can feel overwhelming. You may find yourself thinking, if I can just get them to understand me, everything will be okay. Beneath that thought is often a much older one. If I can finally be understood, I will be safe. Letting go, then, feels like more than ending a relationship. It feels like abandoning the possibility of rewriting your early story. The inner child fears that if you walk away, the unmet need will remain unmet forever. So it clings not necessarily to the person as they are, but to the fantasy of who they could become. There is also grief here. Grief not only for what happened, but for what did not happen. For the tenderness you hoped for the consistency you imagined, for the version of love you thought was finally arriving. The child part of you does not grieve easily because grief once felt unsafe. So instead of grieving, it holds on. In many cases, you are not trying to keep the person. You are trying to keep the dream. The dream that this time someone will stay emotionally present. That this time, your needs will not be too much. That this time, love will not require shrinking. Healing begins when you turn toward that inner child, instead of asking a partner to complete the repair. It involves recognition that the depth of your attachment may reflect the depth of earlier deprivation. It requires gently acknowledging, of course I want this so badly. Of course it feels unbearable to let go. There is an old hunger here. When you begin to offer yourself the validation, reassurance, and emotional presence that were once inconsistent, something shifts. The child part no longer has to chase repair externally. It can begin to feel held internally. And as that internal holding strengthens, the desperate grip on the person who hurt you begins to loosen, not through force, not through self-criticism, but through the quiet realization that the repair you were seeking from them may have always been waiting within you. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms known in psychology. It is the same principle that keeps people pulling the lever on a slot machine. You do not win every time. In fact, you lose more often than you win. But the unpredictability of the reward makes the behavior more persistent, not less. In relationships, intermittent reinforcement happens when affection, validation, or closeness is given inconsistently. There are moments of warmth, deep connection, perhaps even promises of change. And then there are periods of withdrawal, criticism, emotional distance, or hurt. The pattern is irregular. You never quite know which version of the person you will encounter. This unpredictability does something profound to the brain. Dopamine is not released only when we receive pleasure. It is released in anticipation of reward, especially when the reward is uncertain. The uncertainty heightens focus. It increases craving. It sharpens attention. Your mind becomes preoccupied with the relationship because your nervous system is waiting for the next win. When the person who hurt you suddenly becomes kind again, apologetic, attentive, or affectionate, the relief is intense. The contrast between pain and warmth magnifies the experience. The reconciliation feels euphoric, not necessarily because it is deeply healthy, but because it temporarily ends the distress. The brain registers this relief as significant, as meaningful, as worth pursuing again. Over time, you may find yourself enduring long stretches of emotional deprivation for brief moments of closeness. And those brief moments feel disproportionately powerful. You replay them in your mind. You hold on to them as evidence of what is possible. You tell yourself, this is who they really are. The intermittent kindness becomes proof that staying is justified. The cycle subtly reshapes your behavior. You may begin to work harder to elicit the positive response. You adjust your tone. You suppress complaints. You minimize your needs. You try to anticipate moods. Not consciously manipulating, but unconsciously adapting in hopes of increasing the likelihood of reward. When the reward arrives, it reinforces the behavior that preceded it. This is how emotional addiction can form. Not addiction to the person alone, but to the cycle of hope, loss, and relief. The brain becomes conditioned to the spikes. The dramatic reconciliation feels like intimacy. The intense longing feels like depth. The unpredictability feels like passion. But what is actually happening is a narrowing of your emotional world. Your energy becomes focused on maintaining access to the reward. Other sources of stability, friendships, self-care, personal goals may fade into the background because the relationship occupies so much mental space. The uncertainty keeps you tethered. There is also a powerful cognitive distortion that develops. Because the good moments are scarce, they feel precious. You may overvalue them. You may interpret them as signs of hidden goodness or unrealized potential. The mind becomes selective, amplifying the highs and rationalizing the lows. You might say, no one understands what we have. And in a way that may feel true. The intensity is difficult to explain. But intensity is not the same as security. In fact, the more unpredictable the reward, the more entrenched the attachment can become. When you attempt to leave such a dynamic, you may experience withdrawal-like symptoms, intrusive thoughts, longing, anxiety, urges to reach out. This does not mean the relationship was uniquely destined. It reflects the conditioning of your nervous system. Your brain has learned to expect relief from a specific source, and it protests when that source is removed. Recognizing intermittent reinforcement is not about blaming yourself for being addicted. It is about understanding the mechanism that has been quietly shaping your attachment. Once you see the pattern, you can begin to separate genuine intimacy from conditioned craving. Healthy love does not rely on scarcity to feel valuable. It does not keep you guessing in order to keep you engaged. It does not require you to endure emotional droughts for occasional rain. In secure connection, affection is consistent enough that your nervous system does not need to remain on high alert. If you cannot let go of the one who hurt you, it may not be because they are your soulmate. It may be because your brain has been trained by unpredictability. And what feels like deep, irreplaceable love may, in part, be the powerful imprint of a reward system that learned to equate inconsistency with meaning. Letting go can feel like abandoning yourself. And this is one of the most misunderstood aspects of why you remain attached to someone who has hurt you. From the outside, it may look as though you are holding on to them. But from the inside, it can feel as though you are holding on to a part of you. When you invest emotionally in someone, you do not simply attach to their presence. You attach to the version of yourself that exists in connection with them. The dreams you shared, the vulnerability you revealed, the hopes you allowed yourself to form, the identity you began to build as is. To walk away can feel like erasing all of that. There is also the investment of effort, the time spent understanding them, the patience extended, the compromises made, the pain endured in the name of love. If you leave, it can feel as though all of that effort meant nothing, and that is a difficult truth to face. The mind resists loss not only of the person, but of the narrative that your suffering had purpose. Very often, you have shaped parts of yourself around maintaining the relationship. You may have become more accommodating, more tolerant, more self-sacrificing. You may have quieted your needs to avoid conflict. Over time, these adaptations begin to feel like traits rather than strategies. They become intertwined with your identity. So when the relationship destabilizes, you are not only losing them, you are confronted with the question, who am I without this role? If I am not the one who fixes, forgives, waits, or understands, then who am I? For individuals who learned early in life to secure love by adapting, letting go can feel like failing at the very strategy that once ensured connection. As children, we often survive by aligning ourselves with the needs of caregivers. We become attuned to their moods. We anticipate their reactions. We learn that closeness depends on our ability to adjust. That strategy may have once been protective. In adulthood, when you try to leave someone who hurts you, that old survival strategy can activate. It whispers that departure equals rejection, that stepping away means you are unloving, selfish, or cold. Even when you are protecting yourself, the nervous system may interpret it as betrayal. There is also grief for the version of yourself that believed, the part of you that trusted, the part that hoped this time would be different. Letting go can feel like admitting that your vulnerability was misplaced, and that can be profoundly painful. It is easier sometimes to keep trying than to face the possibility that the story will not unfold the way you imagined. Another layer is the fear of emptiness. When a relationship occupies a significant portion of your emotional life, it becomes a central organizing force. Your routines, your thoughts, your future plans revolve around it. Removing that force can create a void, and the void feels disorienting. The silence where there was once constant emotional activity can feel unbearable. So you may stay not only because you want them, but because you fear losing yourself. You fear that if you let go, there will be nothing left of the investment, nothing left of the meaning you constructed around the connection. Yet what often goes unseen is that in staying, you may be slowly abandoning yourself in a different way. Each time you minimize your pain, each time you silence your intuition, each time you accept behavior that diminishes you, the self you are afraid to lose is quietly eroding. Letting go is not the abandonment of self, it is often the beginning of reclaiming it. But before that reclamation is felt, there is a transitional space where identity feels uncertain. That uncertainty can feel more threatening than the familiar discomfort of the relationship. Understanding this shifts the question from, why can't I leave? To, what part of me feels at risk if I do? When you begin to nurture an identity that is not defined by endurance or sacrifice, when you cultivate connections that do not require self-betrayal, the fear of abandonment begins to soften. Because you realize that walking away from someone who hurt you is not walking away from yourself. It is walking toward the self that no longer has to disappear in order to be loved. Unresolved childhood wounds do not remain in the past, simply because time has passed. They become templates, invisible blueprints that shape who feels familiar, who feels magnetic, who feels like home. And often, without realizing it, you are not choosing partners at random. You are choosing within the limits of what your nervous system already understands. If, as a child, love was conditional, you may be drawn to people whose affection feels earned rather than given. If emotional availability was inconsistent, you may feel an intense pull toward partners who are warm one moment and distant the next. If you had to work for attention, you may feel most alive in relationships where you are striving to be seen. This is not a conscious preference for pain. It is a repetition compulsion, an unconscious attempt to revisit an old wound with the hope of a different ending. When someone hurts you, but also carries echoes of early attachment figures, the bond can feel profound. You might describe it as chemistry, fate, or deep connection. But what is often happening beneath the surface is recognition. Your body recognizes the emotional pattern, the tone of voice, the subtle withdrawal, the dynamic of pursuit and retreat, and recognition creates a powerful sense of familiarity. There is a part of you that believes, if I can make this person love me in the way I need, then I will finally heal what hurt before. The relationship becomes symbolic. It is no longer just about the present partner. It becomes about redeeming the past. For example, if you grew up with a caregiver who was emotionally distant, you may feel an intense longing for partners who are similarly unavailable. When they give you attention, it feels precious. When they withdraw, it feels devastating. And somewhere inside, there is a child still trying to prove they are worthy of consistent love. The tragedy is that you may confuse the intensity of this longing with the depth of the connection. But often the intensity reflects the depth of the wound, not the health of the bond. Unresolved wounds also shape your tolerance. If criticism or emotional neglect was normalized in childhood, you may not immediately register it as unacceptable in adulthood. You may rationalize behavior that, to an outside observer, is clearly harmful. Not because you lack intelligence, but because your baseline for what is normal was set early. There is also a familiarity in the emotional posture you adopt. If you were the peacemaker as a child, you may continue to assume responsibility for harmony. If you were the invisible one, you may gravitate toward partners who overlook your needs. If you were praised for being strong, you may endure more than you should, equating resilience with silence. When someone hurts you within these familiar dynamics, leaving can feel like abandoning an unfinished mission. The child part of you still believes that if you try one more time, communicate more clearly, love more patiently, Sacrifice more generously. The story will finally resolve differently. But unresolved wounds cannot be healed by recreating the conditions that formed them. They are healed by experiencing something new, by being in relationships where your needs are not an inconvenience, where repair happens consistently, where you do not have to shrink or chase to feel secure, recognizing that you may be seeking familiar partners because of unresolved childhood wounds is not about blaming your past. It is about understanding the continuity between then and now. It allows you to see that your attachment may be rooted in an old longing for safety, approval, or consistency. And when you begin to meet those longings consciously, through therapy, self-compassion, supportive relationships, the compulsion to reenact old patterns begins to soften. The pull toward the person who hurt you becomes less about destiny and more about history. You start to see that what felt like fate may have been familiarity. And familiarity, while powerful, is not the same as love. Healing requires grieving the fantasy, not just the person. And this is often the most painful part of letting go. Because what keeps you attached is not only who they were, it is who you believed they could become. When a relationship hurts you, there are usually two parallel realities. There is the lived experience, the words that were said, the silences that lingered, the betrayals, the disappointments. And then there is the imagined future, the growth you hoped for, the apologies you expected, the version of them you glimpsed in rare tender moments. The fantasy is built from potential, from fragments of goodness, from promises spoken or unspoken. Very often it is this imagined future that binds you most tightly. You may tell yourself that you are holding on because of love. But when you look closely, you may see that you are holding on to the story of what could still happen. When they heal, when they realize what they lost, when things calm down. The relationship exists partly in reality and partly in projection. The human mind is remarkably skilled at filling in gaps. If someone shows you occasional warmth, you may construct a narrative of their hidden depth. If they express regret once, you may imagine a lasting transformation. You begin to relate not only to who they are, but to who you believe they are capable of being. This hope is not foolish. It reflects your capacity for empathy and vision. You can see potential, you can imagine growth. But potential is not the same as pattern. And love cannot be sustained by possibility alone. Grieving the fantasy means confronting the difference between who they consistently are and who you hope they would become. It means allowing yourself to feel the disappointment fully, without cushioning it with maybe. It means acknowledging that the tenderness you longed for may not arrive in the form you expected. This grief can be profound because it touches something deeper than the relationship itself. It touches your belief in the narrative you created. You may have envisioned a shared future, a healed dynamic, a story of overcoming. Letting go requires mourning that story. And sometimes, mourning the story hurts more than losing the person. There is also grief for the parts of yourself that believed in the fantasy. The hopeful part. The romantic part. The part that trusted the early promises. When reality contradicts the fantasy, it can feel like a personal failure, as though you misread the signs or imagined what was not there. But hope is not a flaw. The difficulty arises when hope overrides evidence. When the mind clings to isolated moments, instead of observing consistent behavior. When the fantasy becomes a shield against acknowledging ongoing harm. Grieving the fantasy is an act of clarity. It requires sitting with the discomfort of seeing things as they are, not as you wish them to be. It requires accepting that the version of love you wanted from this person may not be available from them. And in that acceptance, there is both sorrow and liberation. Because once you release the fantasy, you no longer have to defend it. You no longer have to reinterpret hurtful actions to fit the hopeful narrative. You no longer have to wait for potential to become reality. Your energy, once invested in imagining change, can return to you. This kind of grief is quiet. It is not dramatic. It unfolds in moments when you catch yourself remembering what you thought would happen and gently reminding yourself of what actually did. It is the slow reconciliation between expectation and truth. When you grieve the fantasy fully, the attachment begins to loosen in an organic way. Not because you forced yourself to stop caring, but because you are no longer in relationship with an illusion. You are relating to reality. And reality, even when painful, is steadier ground than hope built on inconsistency.